Karoline Leavitt, 27, the youngest White House spokesperson in history, did the impossible. She won out over the perception in an $800 million defamation case. Picture the irony as Whoopi Goldberg, Joy Behar, and Sunani Host, constantly berating opponents with hate speech, now being exposed by arrogance on their own part. Following months of hot courtroom wars in a media frenzy, Leavitt flipped the opinion's malicious attack into a legal knockout, knocking the show to its knees. Before we get into the story, comment where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the latest stories. The Manhattan courtroom shook as the judge's gavel ripped through the crowd's murmurs. Camera flashes illuminated the room into which Karoline Leavitt walked with unrelenting presence. Her eyes were cold, her blue suit crisp, every step a war cry. Before them, in the defendant chairs, were the View's hosts, Whoopi Goldberg, Joy Behar, and Sunani Host, their faces as if they had the apocalypse before them. Whoopi, normally smug with a carefree smile, now cowered on ease behind dark glasses, her hands clasped around the edge of the table. Joy Behar, the queen of sarcasm, gripped her chair until her knuckles spread, her eyes scanning as if in search of escape. Sunani Host, the only lawyer in the group, riffled through papers with shaking hands, attempting to keep calm, but failing to hide her panic. All three understood today was not a talk show, but a harsh legal fight. Leavitt's attorney, a giant of a man who had a thunderous voice, rose and addressed the jury. The View intentionally blackened Karoline Leavitt's name, he announced, his voice slicing like a knife. They set up a TV ambush, and today they'll pay $800 million. The courtroom burst out, whispers circulated, cameras snapped, journalists wrote frantically. The outrageous figure made even the judge lift an eyebrow. Leavitt remained motionless, eyes darting at the jury before settling on the hosts. No smile, no scowl, just pure determination. She knew this was not simply a battle to restore her personal dignity, but a blow against media conceit. The View, an all-powerful talk show empire until now, quaked before a young woman brazen enough to challenge them. The courtroom was heavy with tension like an impending storm. Light from high windows lit the jury, who sat firm, eyes glued to Karoline Leavitt. She stood at the witness stand, lightly resting her hands on the wooden railing, her voice firm but strong, like a slow-moving river. Nothing could halt. Her attorney, David Harper, with salt and pepper hair and unruffled air, began the questioning, asking the first question. Miss Leavitt, why did you decide to sue the View? Leavitt inhaled, her eyes scanning the room, her gaze meeting the eyes of each juror. I'm not here solely for my own dignity, she started, her tone crisp, every word precision carved. I'm here because what the View did wasn't directed solely at me, but at anyone who has the guts to stand up for what they believe. They made a TV show a weapon, and I couldn't allow that to happen. She paused, her eyes quickly flicking to the defendants' seats, where Whoopi Goldberg, Joy Behar, and Sunani Host sat transfixed. Whoopi folded her arms, attempting to keep her tough demeanor, but clearly failing to suppress her tightly pursed lips. Joy, often quick-tongued, now ducked her head, her silver hair falling over her eyes. Sunny, hugging crumpled papers, gazed at the table as if looking for a refuge in the pages. Leavitt remained calm. She looked back at the jury and went on. I was raised in New Hampshire in a little town where everyone believed in honesty and hard work, she stated, her tone warm but not maudlin. I was not born with money or influential connections. All that I've done, from graduating from college, working at the White House, to becoming press secretary, is a result of hard work and belief in the truth. The jury listened, some nodding slightly, as if her tale touched them. Harper moved closer, his voice gentle but piercing. You've accomplished so much at such a young age, so why decide to go on The View, a show for fiery debates? Leavitt smiled faintly, not smug, but the self-assurance of someone who'd worked out every step. I knew The View wasn't an even playing field, she said, but I wanted them to reveal themselves. I watched scores of their shows, learned how they treated guests, particularly those with opposing views. I steeled myself for whatever they might throw at me. She remembered making the choice to walk into the studio, not because she was naive, but in order to take their trap and make something out of it. I knew they would try to bring me down. She spoke softly with determination. But I also knew that if I stood firm, they would reveal their own prejudice and wickedness. A juror, a middle-aged woman, took notes, her eyes sympathetic. Harper nodded, facing the judge. Miss Leavitt is not only a victim of an assault, she made it a battle for justice. He paused, allowing the words to sink in, then asked, what prompted you to sue? Rather than turning a deaf ear to the insults, Leavitt stood up straight, her eyes burning. Because if we remain quiet, programs like The View will continue to ruin people's reputations without repercussions. I used to send a message. Words have power, but justice is stronger. Her response sent a jolt through the courtroom. Some spectators whispered, jurors exchanged glances. At the defendant's table, Sunani Hostin shook her head as if trying to deny reality. Joy Behar furrowed her brow, her hands gripping tighter. Whoopi finally took off her glasses for the first time, showing worn-out eyes as if acknowledging that this fight no longer belonged to them. Harper ended his introduction. We shall establish that the perception not only belittled Miss Leavitt, but deliberately arranged an ambush to discredit her. He addressed the judge, his voice strong, and we have evidence. The courtroom light decreased as the giant screen in front of the jury glowed to life. A stifling quiet filled the room, punctuated only by light breathing and rustling of documents from the audience. Attorney David Harper, unflappable but with eyes as keen as a knife, moved to the center, pointing to the screen. Ladies and gentlemen, he began, his deep, resonant voice, what you're going to witness isn't a discussion, but a carefully orchestrated ambush. He hit a button and video from The View's broadcast flickered, drawing the courtroom into a pivotal moment. On the screen, The View's studio seemed alive with stage lights and audience applause. Karoline Leavitt, dressed in a beautiful blue suit, emerged with a courteous smile, but warning lights flickered in her eyes. She sat opposite the three hosts, Whoopi Goldberg, Joy Behar, and Sunny Hostin. The atmosphere was warm at first, but in a moment it changed. Joy Behar, with a grin and eyes shining with sarcasm, leaned forward. So, Karoline, she started, her tone sweet but razor sharp. Do you really believe you're qualified to be press secretary? Or is it just because Trump needed a pretty face on television? The studio audience erupted into laughter, piercing like needle. Leavitt didn't even blink. She sat upright, her voice cool but assertive. I was selected based on my experience and ability. She responded, briefly describing her path from White House staffer to Trump campaign spokesperson. I've worked hard to earn my credibility. But before she could even get it out, Sunny gave cut in her voice, cold and critical. Come on, Miss Leavitt, let's get real. Your job is just to make Trump look good, right? Somebody like you, young and inexperienced. How do you think you could possibly hold your own in politics? The crowd chuckled again, more boisterously this time, as if egged on by the host's brief side glances. Leavitt tried to remain calm. Her hands clasped tightly on the table, but her eyes flared with suppressed anger. She started to counter, citing policies she'd communicated and obstacles she'd overcome. But Whoopi Goldberg raised a hand, silencing her with a dramatic headshake. Listen, honey, Whoopi said, voice dropping like a warning. You can say whatever you want, but we know the truth. You're only a pawn in Trump's game. That's all. A burst of applause drowned out Leavitt's words. She pinched her lips together, her eyes scanning the three hosts as if branding their words on her mind. The video stopped. The screen was black. The courtroom breathed with bated air, silent, except for the sharp exhale of Sunny Host at the defense table. Harper turned to the jury, his words measured but forceful. This was not a fair discussion. This was a staged attack designed to humiliate Miss Leavitt before millions of viewers. He stepped closer to Leavitt, still at the witness stand, and asked, his voice gentle but sharp, how did it feel to sit in that chair, attacked by people with such immense influence? Leavitt looked directly at the jury, her eyes bright but unwavering. I was insulted but not shocked, she explained, her tone low and resolute. I expected hostility, but their venom exceeded my imagination. They didn't seek debate. They sought to make a laughingstock out of me. A juror, an older man, scrawled hastily, his brow furrowed. Another female shook her head, her eyes registering displeasure as she looked at the hosts. Harper shifted toward the defendant's table where Whoopi, Joy, and Sunny sat silently. Whoopi folded her arms, attempting to retain her defiant demeanor, but her pressed shut lips revealed her nervousness. Joy lowered her head, her silver hair hiding her eyes as if avoiding the jury's view. Sunny, still holding her wrinkled papers, leaned over and whispered to her attorney, her face ashen. Harper grabbed the opportunity. These women, he said, gesturing at them, us use their influence to vilify a young, talented person, and we will demonstrate they knew precisely what they were doing. The jury murmured, some looking at each other, obviously moved by the video. A journalist in the back row was typing away on a laptop, feeling a moment of change. ABC's attorney, James Whitaker, was standing, attempting to take back control. We will demonstrate this was only part of the talk show style, he said, his voice a little unsteady, but his eyes darted to the footage still on the screen, and his confidence seemed to melt away. Harper smiled weakly, turning to the judge. We have additional evidence, Your Honor, he stated, his voice strong. Evidence that will demonstrate this wasn't a talk show style, but a deliberate plan to ruin Miss Leavitt. The courtroom was silent, all eyes on him, waiting for the next punch. Leavitt, still seated at the witness stand, nodded slightly, her eyes saying, we're winning. Sarah Clean, a former producer of The View, was summoned to the stand by attorney David Harper. The tension in the room was thick, every eye on her. The jury remained still, pens poised over paper, waiting for the revelations. Harper, with piercing eyes and a soothing voice, moved closer to Sarah. "Clean," he started. "Describe your position at the View and what you saw concerning Miss Karoline Leavitt." Sarah breathed deeply, her eyes scanning the defendant's table, where Whoopi Goldberg, Joy Behar, and Sunny Host remained stiff. Whoopi, normally assertive, now hugged her arms tightly, dark glasses covering her eyes but failing to hide her tension. Joy, with rumpled silver hair, bent to confide in her attorney, her face twisted as if anticipating the impending tempest. Sunny, her frayed documents clutched in her hands, looked at Sarah as if looking for an escape route from what was impending. Sarah faced the jury, her voice distinct, although faintly shaking. "I worked on The View for more than 3 years," she explained. "I was tasked with organizing episodes, including the one with Miss Leavitt as a guest." Harper nodded, holding up a pile of papers. "Can you walk me through the preparation for that episode?" Sarah nodded, her eyes more stable. "We had a meeting a couple of days prior to Miss Leavitt's visit," she explained. "Senior producers and the hosts had a discussion on how to approach her. They didn't want a fair conversation. They needed something to buzz about, something viral, something on social media." She hesitated, her eyes momentarily clouded with sadness. The order was clear. Target Miss Leavitt. Make her appear incompetent. The courtroom hummed. An older female juror scowled, writing rapidly. Harper projected an internal email onto the screen, highlighting a line that rocked the room. "Leavitt is the target. Joy begins an appearance. Sunny pushes on competency. Whoopi delivers the knockout." Sarah confirmed. "That's an email from the lead producer. I was standing in the room when it was sent." The murmurs increased in volume. A reporter in the back typing away, eyes shining like she struck gold. Harper pushed on, his tone low but cutting. "Do you have any further evidence, Miss Clean?" Sarah nodded and produced a tiny USB from her purse. "I kept a recording from that meeting," she said, her voice trembling slightly under pressure but unwavering. Harper plugged in the USB, and a producer's voice echoed through the speakers. "We need drama. Leavitt's young, vulnerable. Make her lose her cool." Laughter in the recording sent a chill through the jury. A middle-aged male juror shook his head, his eyes flashing with indignation. Sarah continued, her gaze shifting to Leavitt, who sat calmly at the plaintiff's table. "I didn't agree with the plan," she said. "I told them it wasn't fair, but I was ignored. After the episode aired, I couldn't take it anymore. I contacted Miss Leavitt and gave her everything I had. Emails, recordings, production notes." Leavitt nodded slightly to Sarah, a small but significant movement, akin to a silent thank you. Harper addressed the jury. "This was not an impromptu on-air moment," he emphasized, his voice echoing. "This was a deliberate strategy to ruin Miss Leavitt's reputation." He gestured towards the defendant's table, and they knew precisely what they were doing. Whoopi bowed her head, taking off her glasses for the first time, showing weary eyes. Joy clenched her fists as if to fight back, but couldn't. Sunny, a lawyer herself, whispered frantically to James Whitaker, ABC's lawyer, but her face was white, as if she knew this proof was a death blow. Whitaker stood attempting to regain control. "Miss Clean," he said, his voice smooth but strained. "You quit the show in protest of the personal dissatisfaction." "Right. How do we know you're not just making this up for retaliation?" Sarah stared directly at him, unyielding. "I quit because I could not work for a show that disrespected the truth." She responded, "My evidence has been confirmed. I have no motive to deceive." Whitaker pressed his lips together, finding no chink to attack, and sat down in silence. The jury looked at each other, obviously convinced. A reporter in the corner quickly texted the words, "The View is crumbling," lighting up the phone screen. Harper faced the judge, his voice authoritative. "We will proceed with other witnesses, but this testimony speaks for itself." The perspective didn't only offend M. Leavitt, they intended to annihilate her. The judge nodded, his face serious, ordering the trial to continue. Leavitt, sitting in the plaintiff's chair, watched it all with singular coolness. Her gaze locked with Sarah's once more, and in an instant, they appeared to share a conviction. Justice was arriving. Ceiling light streamed across the lawyer's table, where James Whitaker, ABC's attorney representative, stood in a well-cultivated demeanor of self-assurance. His charcoal suit was immaculate, his voice smooth as silk, but his eyes fluttered with unease as they scanned the jury. With Sarah Klein's withering testimony, Whitaker felt he was on thin ice. Opposite him, Karoline Leavitt sat at the plaintiff's table, her gaze a smoldering fire, unfaltering. Next to her, attorney David Harper folded his arms, the hint of a smile playing upon his lips as if to forecast his opponent's downfall. Whitaker cleared his throat, speaking to the judge. "Your Honor," he started, his voice deep but a little strained, "we will demonstrate that what occurred on The View was only part of the talk show format and not a nefarious scheme. He called his first witness, studio audience member Linda Carter, a tightly smiling, curly blonde-haired, middle-aged woman. Linda approached the stand, her hands tightly folded, her eyes flicking over to the defendant's table where Whoopi Goldberg, Joy Behar, and Sanani Host sat stock still. "Miss Carter," Whitaker said, his tone soft as if coaxing, "did you sense the hosts intentionally ambushed Miss Leavitt?" Linda nodded her head, her voice uncertain. "No, I thought they were joking. That's the opinion. They always say witty things to please the crowd." Whitaker smiled as if getting a point, but Harper got up, his eyes like an animal, prepared to strike. "Miss Carter," he said, his tone low but incisive, "did you get any briefing from the production crew before the performance began?" Linda hesitated, her eyes darting away. "Just they instructed us to clap or laugh when they indicated," she confessed, her voice trailing off. Harper raised a paper, his voice ringing like a sledgehammer. "This is a production directive, telling the audience to produce powerful responses when the hosts assaulted Miss Leavitt." The jury grumbled, a young juror writing rapidly, her eyes flashing with outrage. Harper didn't let up. He was in a behind-the-scenes tape recorded after the show had gone off the air. Joy Behar's voice rang out icy and triumphant. "She believed she was clever, but we humiliated her." The producer's guffaws in the recording caused a chill in the courtroom. One older female juror clapped a hand over her mouth, eyes wide with astonishment. Whitaker leaped to his feet, attempting to get back on track. "That was merely backstage kidding," he rebutted, his voice escalating. All talk shows have such moments, but Harper did not let him catch his breath. "If it was banter," he asserted, gesturing toward the screen, "why did internal emails refer to Miss Leavitt as a target to destroy? Why were the hosts instructed specifically to assault her reputation?" He addressed the jury, his voice low but commanding. "This is not entertainment. This was a calculated attempt to destroy a young woman." The defendant's table appeared paralyzed. Whoopi, her arms crossed tightly, glared at the table as if wanting to disappear. Joy, normally quick-tongued, had her hands clenched, her face red with rage but unable to meet his eyes. Sunny, a lawyer herself, spoke urgently to Whitaker under her breath, but her eyes gave away desperation. A reporter in the corner typed quickly on a phone, the words "The View is collapsing" scrolling on the screen. Harper summoned Leavitt to the witness stand to rebut ABC's arguments. She approached, her step firm, her eyes raking the jury with unassuming assurance. "Miss Leavitt," Harper asked, "ABC maintains you are a public figure and should embrace criticism. What do you have to say about that?" Leavitt gave a faint smile, not smug, but the resolve of someone prepared for every attack. "I accept criticism of my work," she replied, her voice clear and strong. "The View didn't criticize. They fabricated, defamed, and deliberately harmed my reputation before millions." The jury nodded, some scribbling faster. One member, a middle-aged man, glanced at the host with a skeptical look. Leavitt went on, her voice dipping, filled with feeling, but not maudlin. "I'm not filing suit because I'm weak. I'm filing suit because I know if no one speaks out, programs like The View will continue to destroy lives without regard." Her words hit like a bullet, stabbing the hearts of the jury. Whitaker attempted to reply, but his voice cracked. "Miss Leavitt, you can't establish malicious intent," he practically bellowed. Harper quickly raised another paper, an internal View meeting memo reading. "Ensure Leavitt can't reply. We need her to appear to be a failure." The courtroom was filled with murmur, jury sharing shocked looks. Whitaker took his seat, his face white, realizing that he'd walked into Harper's trap. Lawyer David Harper, cool but with burning eyes, stood in the middle, addressing the judge. "We summon the defendants, Miss Whoopi Goldberg, Miss Joy Behar, and Miss Sunny Host, to the witness stand," he announced, his voice echoing like a death knell. The courtroom waited with bated breath, aware that this moment would decide the View's destiny. Karoline Leavitt, from the plaintiff's side, watched with breathtaking serenity, her eyes like a keen blade cutting through the defendant's table. Whoopi rose first, going to the stand, slowly trying to hold her customary confidence, but her tightly crossed arms gave away her nervousness. Joy, with disheveled silver hair, glared at Harper as she went by, as if daring to call her out, but with faltering eyes. Sunny, grasping her crumpled papers, mounted last, her face pale, her eyes wavering like someone walking into a trap. Harper started with Whoopi, his tone gentle but with the sharp edge of a sword. "Miss Goldberg, can you tell me why you referred to Miss Leavitt as a pawn of Trump?" Whoopi cleared her throat, trying her customary TV star smile. "I simply said what I thought," she said, her voice low but unconvincing. "We're a talk show. We say blunt things. It's our job." Harper held up an internal email blown up on the screen. The line drew jury murmurs. "Whoopi, end with a strong line. Make Leavitt unable to respond." Harper glared directly at her. "Is this being direct or some sort of scheme to assault Miss Leavitt?" Whoopi compressed her lips, her eyes moving. I don't remember that email, she muttered, her voice soft. An older male juror furrowed his brow, his pen halting. Harper went to Joy Bihar, who entered the stand defiantly but shaking hands. Miss Bihar, Harper asked, his voice low but insistent, did you research Miss Leavitt before her appearance on the show? Joy shrugged, trying to keep her usual sarcastic tone. I don't require a resume to know who she is, she said, but her smile disappeared as Harper raised a production note. Joy opens on appearance highlight Leavitt as merely a pretty face. Harper tilted his head. You researched, but you knew just what to say in order to take her down. Correct. Joy opened her mouth, but no sound came. She bent her head, her silver hair concealing her rosy face. A young woman juror shook her head, her eyes full of disappointment. At last, Harper called Sanani Holan, who mounted the stand with the stance of a lawyer, attempting to stand firm. But her eyes faltered, her hands grasping her papers like a lifeline. Hostin, Harper said, his voice as cold as ice. You, as a lawyer, should be aware of the repercussions of defamation. Why did you join this assault? Sanani inhaled deeply, trying to defend herself. I merely questioned Miss Leavitt's ability, she said, her voice shaking a little. That's free speech. Harper displayed a Slack message from Sonny to a producer prior to the show. Give Leavitt no chance to react. I'll drive the competence agenda. Harper looked at her, his eyes piercing. Is this free speech or a scheme to destroy her reputation? Sonani opened her lips but stammered only. I didn't mean it that way, she said, and her voice cracked. The jury looked at one another, some of them writing with somber faces. Harper spoke to the jury, his voice echoing like a verdict. These defendants did not only demean Miss Leavitt, they organized, plotted, and carried out an assault to ruin her reputation. He gestured toward the defendants' table, where Whoopi, Joy, and Sunny sat like specters. Whoopi hid her face, her shoulders sagging. Joy fisted her hands, her eyes hollow. Sunny, who was also an attorney, lowered her head, her papers dropping to the table with a soft but echoing thud. Leavitt, from the plaintiff's chair, watched with unblinking eyes. A fleeting moment passed through her mind, the late nights getting ready for the suit, the times when she questioned if she could confront a media giant. But now, seeing the hosts break apart under the gravity of their own words, she knew she'd been justified. A correspondent in the corner flashed a hasty text, the words, "The View dug its own grave," appearing on the screen. Harper finished questioning, addressing the judge. We've established that The View not only behaved in a way that was unethical, but knowingly violated the law, he declared, his tone unyielding. The judge, with silver hair and piercing eyes, touched his gavel gently, indicating the trial to continue. As the jury deliberated, he queried, his baritone voice piercing the charged atmosphere. The person jury, a middle-aged woman with a severe expression, stood clutching a thin piece of paper weighed down by the View's destiny. Karoline Leavitt sat at the plaintiff's table, her fingers lightly entwined, her eyes burning but serene like a warrior poised for triumph. Opposite her, the defendant's table was a picture of devastation. Whoopi Goldberg, without the veil of dark glasses, bowed her head, her shaking hands folded on her lap. Joy Behar, with wild silver hair, gazed at the floor as if attempting to flee reality. Sunani Hostin, still holding on to her worn-out documents, raised desperate eyes like a person whose last hope was gone. Attorney James Whitaker, ABC's representative, sat next to them, his face white, his eyes lost like a man who had wagered and lost his career. The four-person jury cleared her throat, her voice clear and unshakable. In the lawsuit of defamation brought by Miss Karoline Leavitt against The View and ABC Media Company, she started, "We, the jury, find the defendants guilty." A gasp was immediately cut short, like all the air had been evacuated from the room. She continued in a stern voice, "We order the defendants to pay Miss Leavitt $800 million, including reputation damages and punitive damages." The courtroom exploded. Shouts, flashes of the camera, and murmurs as spread like a tidal wave. A reporter in the corner typed furiously, the words, "The View collapses," flashing on the screen. Leavitt smiled faintly, not of victory, but relief, like a person who had outlived a storm. She glared at lawyer David Harper, who nodded his head with proud eyes like they had authored a new chapter in history together. On the defendant's table, Whoopi covered her face, shoulders shaking as if she couldn't stand the weight of the verdict. Joy, for the first time throughout the trial, looked up, her eyes blank, as if she had lost everything. Sunny, being a lawyer herself, gripped her head. Her papers dropped on the floor with a quiet but echoing thud, as if a death knell for The View. The judge slammed his gavel, demanding order and control, but the air continued to vibrate. He turned to Leavitt, motioning for her to begin. Leavitt rose, beautiful and formidable, speaking in a clear, firm voice. "I did not come here for money," she declared, her gaze scanning the jury, then settling on the defendant's table. "I came to prove that no one, no matter how powerful, can destroy another's reputation without consequences. Today we send a message. The truth will always prevail. Her words were like a powerful gust, prompting nods from the jury and subdued applause from some before the judge's gavel warned them to cease. Harper rose, further emphasizing with a deep voice, "This verdict isn't just a victory for Miss Leavitt, but for all who were smeared by the media." He addressed the defendant's table, his gaze chilly. The View abused its power, and now they must pay the price. Whitaker attempted to stand, mumbling a protest, but his voice broke, overwhelmed by the murmur of the audience and the judge's disapproving stare. The courtroom slowly returned to silence, but the tension still lingered. Leavitt stood from the plaintiff's table, her eyes locking with Harper's again, a slight nod confirming they had created history. She exited the courtroom to be confronted with a sea of reporters outside. Cameras burst, microphones went up, but Light spoke only a word, her voice steady yet forceful. "Justice has been served. The View lost, but the truth was won." Her words rang in news reports, spreading like a wildfire on the social media sites. In the courtroom, hosts stood like ghost images of who they used to be. Whoopi, her shoulders slouched, walked off in silence, her eyes gone. Joy, her cheeks flaming, murmured something to her attorney, but the words were barely audible, as though her very soul had been siphoned out. Sunny, who had previously been so assured of the legal acumen, remained still, her eyes vacant, as though unable to accept their kingdom had fallen apart. ABC, its legal staff in shambles, had little future as advertisers started to withdraw and audiences deserted. This ruling was not the conclusion of a lawsuit. It was a turning point, a warning that the media cannot remain above justice. Leave it to her determination and intelligence had turned the perspective from a giant into a heap of ashes. The courtroom now remained quiet with only faint light from high windows to illuminate the vacant seats. The great wooden door swung shut behind a space which had been the scene of one of history's most epic courtroom fights. A small beam of light reflected off the wall at the back of the judge's stand, as if etching into history the moment that the sight faded. The chairs of Joy Behar, Whoopi Goldberg, and Sunny Host remained empty like remnants of an erstwhile all-conquering empire. Outside of that, the View sign at ABC Studio had been taken away, a frigid emptiness, a reminder of the show's collapse, which was once a television giant. Karoline Leavitt, the young woman who reduced a media giant to its knees, was no longer present, but her triumph seared into the $800 million verdict, rippled beyond the courtroom walls like an uncheckable wave. In the days that followed the trial, the media around the globe couldn't get enough of her. "Leavitt brings down the View," a social media headline read, with millions of shares. ABC, the former home of the View, erupted in chaos. Emergency meetings ran long into the early hours, with executives arguing heatedly in boardrooms. A leaked confidential memo confirmed their panic. "We undercounted on Leavitt. This is the largest crisis in our network's history." Advertisers ranging from cosmetics companies to tech firms canceled contracts at a dizzying rate, leaving ABC with hundreds of millions in losses. At last, in a concise statement, the network announced the View's cancellation, bringing the show's near three-decade run to an end. The studio, which had once burned brightly with lights, now rested in darkness like a graveyard of shattered dreams. Whoopi Goldberg, formerly the epitome of confidence, retreated from public life. She released a brief message on social media announcing her retirement. No reasons given, just one sentence: "It's time to rest." The fans were left crying, but the followers of the lawsuit were aware that she did not have a choice. Joy Behar, whose sharp wit had marked her career, sought to write a memoir, but the work dwindled with the aftermath of lawsuits. Sunny Host, who had once been proud of her legal skills, was drawn into a crisis, backing away from TV projects to regroup, according to a short interview. While the View crumbled, Leavitt surged like a beacon light. Out of the courtroom, the story expanded, influencing a new generation. Colleges asked her to appear. Organizations honored her with awards for bravery. In a media conference address, Leavitt addressed thousands, her voice loud but authentic. "I didn't struggle for fame," she claimed, her eyes burning. "I struggled so no one needs to be afraid to stand for what is right." Roaring applause filled the air, and on social media tags announcing her as a game show went far and wide. Leavitt's lawsuit was more than a personal triumph. It was a watershed moment for the media sector. Talk shows formerly free to pounce on guests with impunity started transforming. Producers conducted media ethics seminars. Lawyers were brought in to vet scripts prior to broadcasts. Even some states introduced new legislation to tighten safeguards for individual reputations from media onslaught. The Leavitt effect, as reporters came to call it, compelled media dynasties to reconsider exercising power. On social media, Leavitt was a youth icon. Influencers made videos explaining her win with titles such as How Karoline Leavitt Beat the View, gaining millions of views. One group of fans even sold t-shirts emblazed with 800 million =, justice, making her victory a cultural phenomenon. But Leavitt never got caught up in the glare. She just kept working at the White House, each press briefing a testament to her determination and intelligence. Co-workers said she was no different, still humble, still quick-witted, but now with a higher purpose. The following day in the White House press room, Leavitt faced a thicket of microphones and lenses. The lights were on her, but she didn't flinch. "We've shown the media is not untouchable," she declared, her voice ringing loud and firm. "Keep demanding the truth, and we will change the world." Her words rang out, not only in the room, but on the internet where millions tweeted and posted them as a rallying cry. From the deserted courtroom to the White House spotlight, Leavitt left an unforgettable mark. The view was in shambles, yet her tale was a beacon, shining light upon a new era in which justice prevails over power. The tale of Karoline Leavitt's courtroom victory for The View echoes deep concerns within American society today, especially those of the media's power, individual responsibility, and the struggle for justice within a world fragmented by political and cultural outlook. In the narrative, Leavitt, a 27-year-old female, was confronted with a powerful media empire under siege by vicious comments from hosts such as Whoopi Goldberg, Joy Behar, and Sonani Host. She refused to remain silent, but steadfastly employed the law, tangible evidence such as internal emails, and backstage recordings to reveal the View's smear campaign. Her $800 million victory was not merely a financial judgment, but a message that no one, no amount of power, can annihilate the reputation of another without retribution. The implosion of the perception, from cancellation of the show to retreat by the host, illustrates the actual price paid for misusing media clout. The moral of this tale is particularly applicable to the U.S. situation today, where social media and mainstream media tend to echo personal insults that do severe damage to victims' reputations and mental well-being. Advice from real life. In American society where free speech is valued but occasionally misused, people need to learn to guard their reputation wisely and firmly, as Leavitt did. When confronted with unfair attacks, either on social media, where nasty comments can spread like wildfire, or from mainstream media outlets, don't respond emotionally in the heat of the moment. Do what Leavitt did. Collect evidence, consult experts, and employ legal or social means to reclaim justice. More significantly, the story reminds us of the strength of persistence and belief in the truth, even when confronted with seemingly unbeatable forces. Stand up for yourself, but with a well-prepared and courageous case, so you not only defend yourself, but also inspire others like Leavitt redefine the way the media works in this narrative. Thanks for watching Karoline Leavitt's expose of the destruction of The View. Don't forget to subscribe and enable notifications so you won't miss our next video, where we'll continue with more jaw-dropping drama.